All right, well, let's begin. Welcome, everybody. My name is Greg Dixon, and I am currently serving as chair of the Pacific Northwest AES section. And I am really happy to welcome you all to our meeting here tonight. We've got a really wonderful meeting planned for you tonight with Steve Kirk, who I will introduce here in just a bit. And also, Patrick Donicht is going to be helping us out as well, talking about the studio build that they built together. As I do at the beginning of these meetings, I need to make a few announcements, some related to our schedule and our elections, and then others of a more technical nature. So I'll go ahead and do that before we begin. Just a quick note, upcoming meetings. May 6th with May 6th, we have a meeting planned with Joanna Fang, who is a Foley artist. That's going to be at 6 p.m. also on Zoom. So I hope that you'll join us. That's 6 p.m. Pacific time. So Joanna will be talking about Foley on May 6th at 6 p.m. You don't want to miss it. I'm excited about that, learning about all the crazy artistic things that Foley artists do to get those great sounds that we hear in films. In June, on June 22nd, also at 6 p.m., we are going to be doing a meeting with Bill Hanley. Bill Hanley is going to be talking about the work that he did at the Woodstock Festival, doing live sound for the original Woodstock Festival. So that'll be a really interesting meeting. And again, that is going to be on June 22nd, 6 p.m. with Bill Hanley. Our June meeting is a election meeting, so we will have to conduct an election at the beginning of that meeting. And it's important that I introduce our slate of candidates for the election. It's required that I announce it. And so I'll do that at this time. Currently, our slate of candidates is as follows. Dan Mortensen is running for chair for a one-year term. Bob Smith is running again for vice chair for a one-year term. Gary Louie is running for secretary for a one-year term. Lawrence Schredler is running for treasurer for a one-year term. Currently, we have on the committee running Greg Dixon, that's me. I am going to be passing the torch over to someone else after June, and so I'm it's been great working with the section, but I'm excited to pass the torch, and so I'll be running as a committee member for the June election. Gordon McGregor, who is not from the Pacific Northwest, is it Scotland where Gordon's from? Apologies to Gordon if I've messed that up, but
that is correct. He is from Glasgow, Scotland.
Thank you, Rod. Gordon is running, and as many of you know, he's been an active component of our section ever since our meetings have gone online. So Gordon will be running. Jim Rondinelli, who has been a committee member for the past 2 years, is also running again. And a name that will be familiar to many of you, J.J. Johnston, is also running for a committee position. We do currently have 2 committee positions that are open and waiting to be filled. One of them is a 1-year term and another is a 2-year term.
Excuse me?
We have 2 committee positions that are open. And so if you're interested in being a part of the Pacific Northwest AES section and you want to be on the committee, go ahead and send me a private message here tonight. Or you can send me, you can send me a private message and I can give you my email if you're interested, and we can communicate from there. One quick note though about that is that you do need to be an AES member to be on the committee, so just keep that in mind. And I think that's it for future meetings. A couple announcements of a technical nature. When we do these meetings, we would prefer if you could use your real name So if you go into Zoom and you click on your full name, so not just your first name, but if you can include your real first and last name, that would be great. If you look in Zoom and click on the three dots in the upper right hand corner of your window, you should be able to rename yourself. If you're having any trouble with that, you can let me know, because as the host, I can technically rename you. Just post it here in the chat what your real name is, and I can help take care of that for you if you need it. But okay, and yeah, just if you can, please change your name to your real name. We would appreciate it. Next, during the presentation, once we get started, please turn off your video and your audio. So mute your microphone and your video when the presentation's going. After the meeting, we do invite everybody to socialize a bit. So if you want to stick around after the meeting, we're going to do quick intros. And so stick around and say hi, get to know the other folks at the meeting. That'll be after we conclude. But during the presentation proper, please mute your mics and your camera.
Hey, Greg.
Yep.
I think we had a couple of Zoom bombers, and I just put them back in the waiting room. It was in the chat. So
Okay.
just to let you know, don't let everybody in. It was unusual there. So just to let you know.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right. Yeah.
Go, Steve.
It's all in the day of a moderator.
Okay. All right. So yeah, sometimes you just gotta keep going. And so yeah, and so comments that are of a positive and informative nature, I will relay to the presenters tonight.
And okay, what's happening here is one of the guys is renaming himself as other people in the room. And so if you see and click on the name of the person that's making the chat, it goes down to their actual real name when it goes to a direct message.
You can turn off user renaming, Steve, feature, or Steve or Greg. You can just turn off, users can rename themselves in security, and that will get rid of that option.
Yay, I've done that. And so hopefully we've got a clean house. So
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, now you have to just look for duplicates, because sometimes that's what people do, is they duplicate them. They give themselves the same name as somebody else.
Okay, sorry for all the trouble. Steve T, could I ask you to help me moderate the?
I'm doing it. So
okay, thank you.
You bet.
Thank you.
And I will break in if things get out of hand a little bit. But right. Greetings to everybody that's here for real.
Oh yeah, I was like when I saw that, Joe, I was like, what? That doesn't make any sense. So Joe, great to have you here. Okay, sorry, that kind of threw me off. Yeah, so quick intros after the meeting. Put your comments and questions into the chat, and I'm going to be the moderator tonight, so I will relay those questions to Patrick and Steve as they come in at an opportune time. I think that's it. I think that I've finished up all my announcements. So at this point in time, I'd like to introduce our presenter, Steve Kirk. So everybody, Steve Kirk will be presenting tonight about his home studio build. Steve is a composer for multimedia and runs Steve Kirk Studios, currently based in Port Orchard, Washington. Steve's projects include Ron Gilbert's Thimbleweed Park, a video game. It's a point-and-click adventure game. And more recently, Bart Lowe's Dread Machine. The original soundtrack for Bart Lowe's Dread Machine is available on Bandcamp, and I actually have that link handy, which I will put into the chat. but Steve has a Bandcamp site where you can check out more of his music. And Steve also uses his studio to produce and arrange music for other artists. Other projects include the music for the iOS release Groovy Scallywags for Beep Games and Cookie Jam for SGN. Steve also composed Cantina music for the Star Wars MMOL game, The Old Republic. That's a massive multiplayer online game, The Old Republic. Further projects include music for the Disney game version of The Princess and the Frog and the Farmville theme for Zynga. And then before that, Steve worked on the wonderfully creative Voodoo Vince, also by Beep Games, composing over 3 hours of music for the game. Steve is one of my, as some of you may know, I'm a professor at DigiPen, where I work with Steve. And I teach music and sound design to young students who want to get into the video game industry. And Steve Kirk, in my opinion, is one of the great composers for video games. And one of the reasons why I admire Steve's work so much is just that he uses live musicians so much. And his music touches upon lots of different genres, but especially things like jazz. And I just know anytime I'm looking at a game that Steve's done the score for that it's going to be a real treat to play. So I'm super honored to have Steve. Steve is going to do a little bit of an introduction for Patrick here after he gets going a bit. So I'll let Steve introduce Patrick. But without further ado, please welcome Steve Kirk.
Thanks, Greg. Okay, so here we are. We're going to do a little tour of my latest studio, and Patrick was, a critical component in that endeavor, and he's actually built 3 studios for me. This one being the third. I am going to share screen now and get started. Making sure that we are broadcasting in stereo. Good. So yeah, building a professional home studio in a residential environment. Well, I moved up to Seattle from the Bay Area in 2015, and to be with my current partner, and we lived there for about 5 years, and then we really came to the conclusion, after finding out that our house was knob and tube wiring, that in order to do any upgrades, it was going to be phenomenally expensive, and there was a mortgage and all of that stuff, and property taxes were going up, and we were becoming a bit anxious about that. And Janine talked to her financial advisor, who said, well, if you look outside of King County for a place, you could probably sell your home for enough money to liquidate your mortgage, buy a new house, and have money left over, the way that the housing market is now. And that was just a year and a half ago at this point. I think it's still pretty crazy now, but that prompted us to look, and we found a lovely place in Port Orchard. But before we do that, let's take a little look at, this is the studio I had in Lake City. And it was a beautiful place, and I really did not want to leave it, but we did, and we ended up here. Here it is, the first view of our new house. Let's see if these arrows work. Okay. Oh, they do. Let's back up. So, looks like I deleted something. That's no good. There it is. There we go. Okay, sorry about that little glitch. There we are. There's the house. For some reason, I ended up deleting some stuff, but it's all back. Thank God for undo. Anyway, here's our new place. This is the first day we saw it. The thing that prompted us to get this house in particular, but besides it becoming available and being relatively within our range, is that there was a utility shed out back. which I thought might be a really good thing to convert into my home studio. And part of looking for a new place was me trying to figure out where I'm going to put my next studio. Was it going to be in the basement? Was it going to be somewhere else? Was it going to be in one room of the house? Uh, this 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 I think this separate building was pretty convincing. So let's look at the overview a little bit. There's a side view, and then here's the Google Maps shot, and you can see the shed back here, and you can also see this RV canopy that was there. So that's where we wanted to move the shed. The idea being that we would move the shed and put it where the RV camper would be, but we'd have to get rid of the RV camper, and that was going to be an interesting proposition because we were going to have to lay a new foundation and that sort of thing. So first was consultation with Patrick, and I sent him photos from inside of the shed and outside, and gave him dimensions and stuff like that, and we kind of went from there. So with those dimensions, he actually came up with this diagram. First of all, Patrick Donicht is an old friend of mine. I've known him for it has to be 45 years at this point. He's a studio designer, a musician, and a good friend. He's always been interested in audio, speaker design, and had already built 2 studios with me in Oakland and in Lake City. And he is now an expat living in Ecuador. So we had to do all our early planning via Zoom and email. So the first step was to send him the photos of the utility shed with the measurements, length, height, width, and with this information he came up with the working plan model, which is the design you see here. And at this point, Patrick, do you want to talk about this?
Yeah, a little bit. Just to highlight the low-tech nature of the way I do things with graph paper. It seems to be easier than any kind of trying to learn a program. I think it works really great. You can visualize easy with it. But yeah, this kind of just lays out where the bass traps are going to be in relation to the speakers and the equipment. And based on what he sent me, we were able to determine that it was going to be fine for him to go with this location. That's all I want to say on that one.
Okay. What he suggested from the outset were to install at least a few VPRs, variable plate resonators, and those consist of steel plates placed in a wall-mounted wall-mounted bass trap, and that steel plate is fronted by rock wool insulation material, and then behind the steel plate is a foam backing which rests against the wall, and this is all contained in a wooden framework. So expensive. The steel plates were pretty expensive and kind of a hard sell for me and my partner, actually. We were wondering if it was really necessary, and I think that the thing that I remember Patrick telling me was, well, if you don't get those, it'll sound shitty. It's just too small of a room to sound good without that kind of help, in terms of modifying the sound in that room and the reflections and stuff. Yeah, but construction supply costs in the middle of COVID had skyrocketed, and we needed to keep the budget as tight as possible. So some decisions that we needed to make regarding the smaller size of the studio are, what are the essential things that you want when you decide to build a studio? Well, it needs to sound good, and you need to deal with sound leakage coming in or going out. That stuff needs to be minimized as much as possible. And then maybe primarily, Playback needs to be trustworthy for mixing and mastering, and also because of the reduced size, we began reassessing the priorities based on the reality of the new space. There are issues with the size, like we couldn't record. We knew it wasn't going to be a drum room. We weren't going to be recording drums there. The new studio wouldn't be large enough to accommodate drums, or recording larger groups would become less practical. So there was an added emphasis on playback at a mastering quality level. The steel-plated wall-mounted traps were a major factor in making that goal possible. So we also determined that the larger speakers used in the previous studio, and I'm just going to go back to this slide here, those things were great. They sounded really great, but they were really too much of a footprint.
Yeah, and it included all those amps and equalizers and that pile of stuff
Yeah,
in between them as well. So it was just the new space was just too small to,
right.
and these are old. I designed and built this speaker system, what, 10 years?
That's right. At least 10 years. It's been more than that, really, Patrick, when you think about it. It was for the original, it was for the first official Oakland studio that you built when I was in the Bay Area.
Hey,
And
Steve, we had a question to about the whole space, asking, am I correct? The whole space is 16 feet by 12 feet?
Yes.
that's right. It's not
Correct.
big. It's not big. So, yes, good question. So, what we ended up buying were these focals. Uh, is that how you pronounce them? I don't know.
Yeah.
Just called them focals because I don't speak French, and I don't care, and I never heard anyone tell me I was wrong until maybe yesterday. Anyway, these are the smallest ones that were available. They're plenty loud, by the way. They're super loud. I never even approach full volume with these things, and I think that those are 3.5 inch speakers there with those little 1.5 inch woofers or tweeters, I mean. And then so two of those with a subwoofer, and they're bi-amped, so no power amps on the floor or anything like that. So we were really reducing our footprint for the speakers. That ended up being really helpful. Plus, they sound amazing, right, Patrick? They
Yeah.
just
Well, it was an upgrade. I mean, I spent a lifetime designing and building speakers that were generally better than anything you could buy. And then uh, that what happened to me was my speakers just died out because I'd used them for so many years. They just gave up the ghost, and I replaced them with a set of focals, and said it was a twin 6 BEs and this same subwoofer sub 6. And after that, I said, I'm never going to build another speaker as long as I live. They were so much better than what I had going on.
and I actually used them for. I bought them before construction began so that I would be able to just kind of warm up to them. And plus, there's a breaking in period for these things, which I guess is what, 48 hours of play, something like that. Anyway, I put way more time on these speakers than that. And even in a bedroom with a bunch of weird echoes and it was completely not flat, these things were pretty reliable regardless. If you got they worked very well as near fields. Um, they're a little extended out back further than near field at this point, but they're a great speaker. So it was a really good purchase. It was well worth it, and a definite upgrade. And especially if you're going to be focusing on things like getting the mix right or getting the mastering right, these were a real key ingredient. Uh, Moving on to the construction. So we have these construction tasks that we needed to do. We needed to pour a concrete slab underneath the RV canopy. There was no foundation underneath the shed the way it was. Just some big boards. And we needed to remove that RV canopy. Let's go back and take a look at that. That thing here, which it seems kind of small here, but really it was like an airplane hangar or something. So we needed, at that point, to move the utility shed from behind the house to the new concrete slab, which would be underneath the RV. So we'd be twisting it around so it would be facing sideways to the way it is now, and going this way, basically replacing the footprint of the RV canopy. We
Hey,
needed to.
Steve.
Yes.
Oh, sorry to interrupt.
No, that's okay.
We had a question about the speakers. So before we keep moving on,
That's fine.
Joe Carter was wondering, is that a passive radiator on the speaker's side?
Yes, it is. Patrick, you can tell me about the advantage of a passive radiator. I know it sounds good, but I don't know why.
Well, it tends to be a little bit more broadband than a ported systems, and yeah, they work great.
Okay. So then we needed to, we needed to find an electrician, and he needed to draw power from the house into the new building via a conduit, some of which needed to be dug underground and funneled over to the corner of the new place. And we needed to add an extra 3 feet to the building for storage, and also to build a muffler system to draw in new air and to pull out old air without pulling in or emitting sounds from the studio. So a little later on, we're going to talk about that muffler system, and then wiring the studio. Patrick, maybe at this point you can describe the unique wiring requirements for this place as opposed to what an electrician would normally do when they were just wiring up electricity in an outside, mother-in-law type joint. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Usually what happens in standard electrical outlets is a thing called daisy chaining, where you just go from one outlet to the next and just hook them all together in parallel. And that's your, 20 amps is usually, even 2 rooms are hooked up to 20 amps a lot of times. But what we did here was we had a dedicated line and a breaker for each outlet. And we used a 10-3 wire, which is a very heavy for high currents for 30 amp purposes. And what that gave us was a really low resistance generally. And then with all the different circuits, basically it really evened out the resistance, because what you want to try and do is have all equal resistance from all of your cables, if you can have them all the same length and grounded in the same spot. Short of that, what we got is some really big cables, and we're not pulling much current through those. So the low resistance keeps the noise level really low. It keeps it interference from in between pieces of gear, which is where a lot of noise is generated from just proximity, not only proximity, but from fields, electromagnetic and the generated fields, otherwise radio frequency fields. And with digital stuff, it goes up really high and can mess with you in lower frequency ranges. So
you're saying excessive resistance will introduce noise into your system, into your sound system.
Yeah, it sure can.
Anyway, I can testify that the power in here is super duper clean, the best so far. Yeah, and very, very quiet. And our electrician really complained about working with that heavy gauge wire. It took him about twice as long to deal with it, but in the end, it honestly didn't end up being the most expensive thing. Not really. The most expensive thing was really just, it's hard to say what the most expensive thing was, but it was worth it. It's absolutely worth it to have a place that is really even more reliable. And the last place, which was amazing, the electricity was not as clean, and we had some issues with that. So that was a definite move up. Anyway, so after that, Patrick and Renaissance man Bill Bainbridge would finish constructing and installing the bass traps, the tube traps, which come from the old studio. You can see them in here. We imported those over and used most of them, actually, I think.
A lot more than I thought we were going to use.
Yeah, yeah, and so we use those in combination with the new traps and VPRs that we were constructing. We were lucky that the building contractor we finally settled on was qualified to do slab pouring, canopy removal, and studio construction. The concrete specialist of the construction team had use for the canopy, so this was very fortunate. They gave us an even trade. Pour the concrete slab in exchange for the canopy with no labor costs. All we had to pay were supply costs, concrete and dump truck rental. So that was very cool. After getting bids from several other businesses, we ended up hiring See a Need Construction, and they were able to take on these multiple tasks that otherwise would have required us to hire at least more than one contractor. They were able to disassemble the RV shelter that we inherited when we bought our house, and where the new location of the studio is to be. A very delicate operation, which could have easily gone wrong. Imagine one of those things falling over on a neighbor's house, for example. That's what we were worried about. They had to pour a new concrete. They were able to pour a new concrete foundation. One of the people on the team is a concrete specialist. And they were able to move the shed to a new location using a small tractor, metal rollers, and 2x4s. Another delicate operation that they have done multiple times for other clients. They were able to build this extra eave extending the length of the studio to create a new small room for the studio ventilation system and extra storage. Really important, that one there. Building out the inside of the studio with double layers of drywall and insulation, installing subflooring, and painting the inside. So the electrician we contracted was an experienced union veteran, over 25 years, now retired. He cost about half of what a licensed electrician would have charged. A good thing, too, since electrical supplies had more than doubled from the previous year. So, yes, our wiring was way above code requirement, costing about twice what a normal wiring job would require. And Patrick has already explained kind of why that is. There was one question that I was asked before I was to give this presentation, and what sort of zoning inspection laws did we have to comply with? And the answer is that we didn't have to do that, because even though our mailing address is Port Orchard, we actually live in a place called Manchester, an unincorporated town. So it turned out that no electrical inspection, or really any kind of inspection, now that I think about it, was necessary. So that was cool. These are the cool things that help mitigate the fact that everything was more expensive during COVID. Anyway, so let's just look at this. Let's just look at this canopy removal. It's pretty interesting how they did it. There they are. The slab has been poured. You can see that, and they are just strategically pulling stuff apart. I could show you more pictures, but that would be, you get the idea. You have to be really careful when you're pulling this stuff down so it doesn't fall on something important. And now I have the moving of the shed video. It's a few minutes, but it's worth watching. Check it out.
Left a little bit.
Your ass goes to the
There you go, right there. That's it, yeah. Straight out. There you go. Take it left a little bit. There. There we go. Rolling.
isn't it?
Okay, hold up. Hold up.
Three.
Yeah, okay, so we got 2 rollers in one place.
Here so much. Yeah, no, that's fine. That's fine.
That's one of the rollers that they were rolling that thing on.
It was it. Probably in our way if we didn't.
Combination of rollers and boards. And look how they're angling the stuff so it moves just the way they need it to.
Okay, hold on. And off the second one. Watch the roof.
That's right. Watch the roof.
We're gonna have to pull back.
We're gonna pull it back.
I got a foot to go. The whole building's moving. Yeah, it's on rollers. Somebody talk.
Keep
Press
going.
forward until you hit it.
Right there.
Push. Keep going, you're doing good. Very good, keep going. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going.
Look at that. 3 feet exactly. Okay, this is it, the final laydown. We are done blocking. We got it felted. Everything is about to land right where it's supposed to. Like a glove, dude. Oh, man. Yay, we're down! Woo! And done. Now comes the fun.
Right. Very precise. It's even hard to imagine being that precise, but that was exactly 3 feet remaining on the concrete slab, which was going to be our storage place. So now we go to building the muffler air system. And there is Patrick preparing to begin work on this. And here's
Some important stuff going on there.
yeah, that's right. And he's beginning to build the muffler system with the combination of plywood and foam.
I had to drywall the inside of that first, and
Right.
then here's the kind of the pathway. It's a bit of a maze.
Right. The thing that I don't have a shot of, unfortunately, is the blower motor. But you have to take my word for it. Below the ladder, in the center picture is where that was, and then there was a vent going outside. That would be pulling in the new air from the outside and putting it through in a lower corner on the other side of the building. Here's some
Hey,
more
Steve?
shot. Yes,
Yeah.
We have a question from Luke Pacholski,
sure.
who's wondering, was the shed anchored to the slab?
Yes.
Yes, it was. After we did that, yes, after we moved it.
Mhm.
That's a code thing. You have to do that.
Even though there
Even though
wasn't an inspection, you
that's
definitely
right.
want to be doing that because it gets windy where they're
Yeah.
at.
Yeah. No, he didn't want to have that thing unanchored at all. We really wanted this thing to be solid all the way around. Uh, and so here's the muffler in process here. Um, Basically, these are two separate. These are going to end up being two separate thingies. Maybe I'm not the one to explain this, but
Well, one's an in and one's an out.
there you go. There it's taking it's easier for me to visualize what's going on when I see it in a more complete state, right? And so here it is in the storage space, and in the center picture, you're looking actually at the inside of the studio where it extends in to almost the end of the room, uh, uh, which you can see on the right. And
So what
and
happened
here's
actually is with this
yes,
space is that, well, you can go to that next picture, Steve.
okay.
Um, is that there was no storage space at all, and I had just planned on using the wall to build. It would have been much easier to just build it on the wall, but what you saw was a crazy labyrinth that I designed so that it could all be up in the ceiling, and you could use the lower part of it for storage. And it made the build a lot more difficult, but it still achieved the same end.
In fact, my
Using
notes on that, Patrick, were Patrick's design for this remained fluid and was modified a couple of times to create extra room for storage in the extra Eve area.
and that really helped, made a big difference in that storage space.
I got a bunch of stuff crammed in there now. I kind of am embarrassed to say, but I just said it,
Yeah,
right?
that's what it's for.
Yeah. So, um, now on to the VPRs. Here they are, gluing foam that ends up being on the back of these steel plates. I sent you the receipt for those steel plates, right? Weren't they like what, 3/8 of an inch, 1/2 inch, or
They were 13 gauge, 13 gauge, 16 gauge, and 18 gauge.
okay, right.
So
The
that's
18 being the
basically
thickest.
1.1 millimeter to 2.1 millimeters.
Mhm. So here they are gluing the foam. Here they are. Well, that's a different base trap altogether. That doesn't have a steel plate in it, but you can see the first VPR in the center shot. And this is before the rock wool insulation goes on the front of it, but the foam is already on the back, of course. And then all of these traps were going to get covered with burlap that we were lucky enough to find at Joann Fabrics. Thank God we were able we cleaned them out. We had just enough burlap to finish the studio, pretty much. There's still a few pieces left, but that we used most of it. Uh, so, um, and now we go to the well. You see a little bit of the lighting there. We found really pretty decent track light.
LED, it's
Yeah,
all LED lighting.
yeah, and it was cheap. It was super cheap. If you go to Lowe's, it was at least twice as much, and we just found it online cheap, so that was cool.
And of
Um,
course, all the lights are on their own separate circuits, at,
right,
as is every outlet on a separate circuit with its own ground. So the lighting is done kind of the same way.
right. I'm glad you mentioned that because I did not have that in my notes, so that's a good thing to know. Uh, and we were also lucky. I have a friend named Sean Peterson who donated this cork flooring. So you see the subflooring underneath, and someone asked whether that aids in sound absorption or whatever, and it might, but really it's standard subflooring.
It's very,
People
very
use,
thin.
yeah. But the cork looks nice, and it reflects sound nicely too. I think
Yeah.
it sounds really good. So it was kind of the perfect thing to have in there. It's beautiful, and it was free. So that was a double good thing. Um, let's look at this, and here we are. The studio is complete. So um,
Quickly.
that's right. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about my composition process, because this really factors into why we designed the studio the way we did. Electric and acoustic guitars, stringed instruments, banjo, mandolin, etc., and live performance, are an integral part of my composition style. And so the studio needed to be able to not just support mixing and mastering, although that was becoming a more primary need, but also live recorded performances. So in addition to that, virtual instruments, MIDI, sampled libraries factor into the productions to more or less of a degree. So right now I'm going to play you guys a sample of one of my earlier music cues that I did in the Oakland studio for a game called Voodoo Vince, called Sausage Factory. So that was done in the Oakland studio. It was determined after the studio was complete that there was still enough leakage from even a moderately loud guitar amp to be uncomfortable and possibly be a disruption for neighbors. Although normal playback levels did not seem to be a problem, like you could barely hear that outside. So how do you handle a leakage problem like that from outside for loud guitar amps? And eventually, and this happened really after the studio had been complete for maybe about 6 months, I decided to get the universal audio aux. What this is an attenuator. You plug the speaker out of the amp head into the aux, and then there is an output that goes to the speaker if you want to use the guitar amp speaker for a monitor in the room. But you don't even really need to have that on. There's a stereo out that goes into your DAW that has speaker emulation and also room sound emulation. So it's really good too. And I got it after I read a really a positive review by this guy, Joe Gore, who is a guitar player. Some of you may know who he is. But he is a very respectable gent. And 2 years later, he wrote another review saying, yeah, it's still really great. 2 years later, I still really think this is a fantastic thing. So I did get one of those things, and it does work. The other thing I use is virtual guitar amps, and universal guitar amps is a great solution. Is a great solution also in a studio where high volume leakage is concerned. So, yeah, in my opinion, zero latency monitoring is the only way a virtual amp model works correctly when tracking. DAW plugins have too much lag, meaning any lag is too much, really. There should be none. And Universal Audio has several guitar amps that I have purchased and I really like. So I'm going to play you now a piece that was originally written in the early 1990s, but I reorchestrated in my new studio to just kind of test it out. And these are all virtual guitars. These are all UA guitar amp models that, amongst many other instruments. as a test, also, the last game I worked on, the work was done and the mixing and the mastering was done in my Lake City studio for the Bartlow's Dread Machine video game, and that was a great score. I was very proud of the work I did on that. I spent a year and a half on it. As an experiment, a test, I remixed and mastered a piece from that game. The goal was to bring out a little bit more of the melodic and harmonic color of the piece, and to get a sense of what my new mixing environment was going to be, and and anyway, so here is that, and then we could talk about that afterwards. And here's another VPR in a corner mount. In Patrick, is that your studio?
Yeah.
Hey, that's it, folks. Thanks so much for listening to my little story and listening to my little music cues. It was really fun to prepare this unique experience for me. So I hope you guys had a good time. I'm going to get out of screen sharing at this point.
Yeah, Steve, thanks so much. That
You're
was
welcome.
incredible. We have some questions, and I'd like to
Okay.
kind of break them apart into a couple parts because there were questions about your music and about your process, which we will be great to talk about, and I look
Sure.
forward to talking about that with you. But before we move to that, there were some questions about the studio as well. So I thought maybe we could kind of break it up into these chunks and start with the questions that related to the studio.
Sure.
Mike Mateski, Dr. Mike, I'd like to invite you to just open up your camera, which I see that you have, and your mic to ask questions.
I posted it. Now I have to go find my question or questions. All right. I was curious about you answered them. They are LEDs, and related to the LEDs, whether you have them on dimmers or not. In our studio, we tested LEDs and found that we simply couldn't find any dimmers that would work, i.e., we found that at 8 and 16K, there was just too much noise emitted. The other related question is, what is the ground system? I mean, you ground everything to a pointer. I presume the walls are drywall. What was or is the flooring material? And did you happen to run an NC rating on the room? Which kind of relates to, I believe, Luke's question about noise from outside coming in, inside going out, that sort of stuff.
Didn't run an NC on it, but if over on Steve's, the left side of the screen, there's a panel back there, and that's where all the grounds go. They all end up back there. So it's star grounded at that panel. Yeah. Let's see. The floor is wood.
Cork flooring.
Well, I think the frame is a wood frame.
Oh,
floor.
the frame.
Yes, it's not a concrete floor or anything. So it's a wood frame floor with plywood underlayment, and then the cork. And then the walls are drywall, using fire rated, the 5/8 stuff that you usually use on the ceiling. That's the 2 layers of that on all the walls and the ceiling. So we went with mass to stop the sound from getting in and out. The biggest problem in the whole room is the door,
right?
Which I said at the very beginning.
It has to be a solid door, right? And we said, okay, great. It should be a solid door. I agree with you. And we went and we found something that was advertised as a solid door, but really once we put it up, we realized this is hollow. So that's the weak link in the studio. In fact, I think that's where most of the sound emits outside.
Even though we've got a pretty decent seal around the edge and put some vinyl, what the hell is it called? Loaded vinyl. It's have a mass vinyl. It's a very thick sheet of vinyl. And that did a pretty amazing job actually of making it usable, because it was actually unusable with just the door by itself.
Yeah, it's true.
So
and it is the weak link. And any studio upgrade, that's kind of at the top of the list in terms of actual build. That's right at the top. It's like, well, we have to shell out for a new door.
Yeah, or a little case or a little entryway with another door at a 90-degree angle.
I won't discuss anything about my own studio, but I entirely agree with what you're saying. The fundamentals, you don't want, in theory, any noise to go out, any noise from outside to come in. You want the interior sound to be dialed in very well. Easier to say it than do it.
I will say, I will say that the thing that you expect the most sound to be emitted from, which is to say the vents, no, it's no sound coming out of there or coming in from the outside. The mufflers work extraordinarily well. They worked well in Lake City. They work even better here because they circulate the air better, and circulating air is kind of important.
Well, one thing
Don't
that's
want to suffocate in the studio.
it's overlooked in almost every small studio that's built, and
In Oakland, we didn't have it, and it got brutally hot in the summer.
that was the only time we didn't have it. It was in the last one and now this one. Yeah.
Very true. Very true. In my studio, I have two separate HVACs, one for the control room with the others for the large room. The extent that we went to try to control any noise or turbulence
Right.
was way beyond the proposals of any of the contractors that we invited out to make a proposal. It's like
Right.
they simply didn't get it.
No, they don't get it, and that's why stuff is so expensive. And we couldn't, we had to work on a budget, and I meant to say this earlier. We had to be really careful because the costs were skyrocketing. So ordinarily, contractors do tend to overbuy a little extra wood just in case something screws up or whatever. And Patrick really didn't have the luxury of doing that, so he ended up making a lot more trips. So the timeline was extended out a little bit just simply because we had to be more careful about our purchases, and sometimes we didn't buy enough, had to go back and get more and things like that. And there's no HVAC system here. It's a simple device just taking air from the outside and taking the old air out. But it works really well, and it doesn't really get too hot until right in the middle of summer. And in the winter, you can just warm your hands over a tube amp.
Thank you. Thanks, Mike. Steve Turnage asked, Patrick, could you go into a little bit more detail on the VPRs? Those were the variable plate resonators.
Yeah, those things are amazing. They're really cool, relatively new technology. And what they are plates of common steel. I use galvanized so it doesn't rust over time. And basically it's just a steel plate that's hanging. And it's loose, so you push on it and it moves. And on the back of it is this foam, this fairly lightweight, but kind of rigid foam. There's some high-tech versions that people have been debating about which is the best. And turns out generally it's just cheap foam tends to work well. Here in Ecuador, all the parts for the VPRs are really cheap. So that was part of, I had this idea to put even more VPRs in Steve's room until I found out the reality of prices up in the US at that moment.
We bought 3 plates, right? And that was about $675 because I looked at the receipt yesterday.
Yeah.
And then there's the price of the rock wool insulation.
Well, the plywood sheets were, they had to be finished grade, so they were $120.
A sheet of plywood. Remember how cheap those things used to be?
Yeah. So yeah, but anyway, this is a plywood frame, a 3/4 inch plywood frame that sticks off the wall. You measure the foam and the plate, and then you cut the side walls so they're about the same. So the VPR, the metal sheet, and the foam, which is silicone glued to the back of it, is touching the wall basically. If it isn't, that's still okay. And then the frame is what just holds the whole thing up, because they weigh a lot, the metal plate does, because it's a full 4x8 sheet of plywood. And so the plate is 7 feet by 3 feet, something like that. Yeah, 6 inches on either side. So it's a pretty big piece of metal. From the research that I did, there's only one product that's made like that you can buy, and it's 1 meter by 1.5 meters, and that's for shipping purposes, I'm sure. But basically, this metal plate just hangs there in the air. A bass wave comes piling into it, and this flopping piece of steel moves micro amount, and the foam in the back of it kills it, deadens it. So it's super effective at low frequencies. It's relatively broadband at low frequencies. It has a lower limit depending on the thickness of the material. So what you want to do is some calculations in your room and figure out the range of frequencies that you need to deal with and in what plane, because they do happen planar, I believe, and it's borne out by my installations. Bigger, lower waves in the long end of the room and shorter ones on the side. So that's what we did with Steve's. We have like 2.1 millimeter in the back wall, and 1.1 on one of the side walls, and 1.3, 1.4, 1.5.
So what I notice, and I especially noticed it with the remix of the Bartlow's Dread Machine cue, the last cue I played, is that I had a really easy time figuring out bass relationships to everything else, and I could hear around the bass more than I've ever been able to hear. So there's nothing getting in the way of me hearing the clarity of a low bass note, and that has always been a challenge, and I don't feel like it's a challenge anymore. In fact, I have to kind of pinch myself and go, oh, wait, I can hear the bass. I don't have to worry about over or under compensation because I'm really hearing what's there now. And there's very little guesswork compared to previous studio environments. So I really think that the VPRs had everything to do with that, especially the delineation of the bass.
And we were able to do, everything was pre-fabricated for the most part. And we were able to install these 3 VPRs and the rock wool that went in front of them, because of the VPRs only work at low frequencies. They don't help you at the higher frequencies or mid-range frequencies because it's a big steel plate. So we took this rock wool, Roxol 60, I think was the stuff. It's like Owens Corning 705, the thicker
and
Owens Corning.
The 60 is a density rating, is that right?
Yeah, it's a higher density than the 703 type Owens Corning, which I'm just quoting numbers that I think are maybe familiar to people. But anyway, it has this 4 inches of this stuff, 100 millimeters, all over through the whole face of the VPR, so that it also has a broadband absorption. So it's really broadband. So we were able to put these up relatively quickly and listen just in the room, clapping in the room and talking and listening, and then putting in them 1, 2, and 3. And it was pretty cool.
Yeah, and you had planned on putting in more VPRs, but budget constraints forced us to rethink. I think 3 works fine. So there's one on either side and 1 in the back, and it works like a charm.
Mm-hmm.
It's a beautiful thing.
Plus, you had some leftover large traps for the other back wall, the wall behind or in between the speakers there. You had some nice ASC style tubes. I'm going to also talk a little bit about the tubes right now, since we're in traps. So it's a insulation for a ventilation duct. So it's a hollow tube built out of, well, this is out of fiberglass, Steve's are, but you can get them out of rock wool as well, with a just plugged top and bottom. And that's one style of tube trap. And the other style is like Helmholtz, which is using sonotube, those concrete forms. And So we had a couple big ones of those. We used that for some of the extra low end at the far end of the room, between the speakers and next to the subwoofer, which is asymmetrically placed. It's not in the middle. It's off to one side. And then the Helmholtz styles, I think, not completely, I can't remember, I'm looking at Steve's room, but basically they're really important for imaging. You put a tube trap in between your two speakers, you're hanging this thing down. It can be above the speakers, but basically in between that zone. And that for generally controls the width. It sends the width of your stereo image, makes it really broad, a little bit too broad actually. So you take another tube up in the top, like that one there, and that brings it together, makes the imaging really coherent, make it able to hear. And I've been using tubes now for 30 years, I think. And they still are hanging out in the design because they work so well for diffusion, and they're critical for me for imaging. There's a guy down here who had a studio. I went over and designed a little room treatment for his room, put a big bass trap in the corner, turned them diagonal, and hung these tubes up. So his imaging was really good. And I could tell the first mix that he sent to me, I go, yeah, now he can hear what's going on because the imaging is cleaned up because of the tubes. So anyway,
I should interject. We Patrick and Bill Bainbridge, when they were EQing the room, it was very little knob twisting and a lot of moving stuff into the right place, and making adjustments in the physical space, because the speaker system is really just high end shelf and low end, right?
Yeah.
Just that's all it is. So they're really good speakers, and they don't need very much EQ. So but to make fine adjustments, they move stuff and added tubes or put them in a different place, and it makes a big difference. It's not subtle.
It's more powerful than an EQ, and that's actually borne out in the REW analysis. Because I've had an EQ in my system down here, and multi-band, it's a spec, so it's like a 4-band parametric thing. And you look at this, and I said, well, I wonder if I could do something with this frequency. And I would go to that frequency, dial it up, crank it down. I mean, really like full. Let me cut this frequency fully 16 dB or 12, or I'm not sure which of this does. And then you do another ping in the room, and it looks exactly the same, as if you did nothing to affect it. And you move a bass trap, and boom, you can shift that wave over here. You can bring it down and move it. And that's what I did here again.
If they want it, do you guys want to see the EQ sweep of the final EQ sweep of the studio? Because I have it here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think folks would get a lot out of that. Thank you.
Hold on a second. Here we go. The old share screen. There it is. These are the last bits of EQ sweeps we did on July 24th, the last day they did them. So let's look at an early one just for some perspective. I'm not sure there's that much difference. Oh, there is a difference. So that's the first one we did the morning of that day. The next one, a little flatter.
I think we're going left and right too.
I don't know what that means, Patrick.
It means we're doing one speaker at a time, and
oh, is that right? Okay.
And then doing the two together.
Oh, left and right. Well, duh.
So moving things around and doing sweeps.
This is the second to the last one.
So for me, the important line that I'm looking at in these is the time display. You've got, of course, if you don't know, frequency left to right, amplitude top to bottom, and then front to back is time. So the lower line here, where all those waves come down, that's your reverb time in your room. And if you can get that to be even, then the upper line is not nearly as important. And most people don't publish this. If you go to studios, they don't show you this because it's fucking impossible. I'm sorry. It's difficult as all get out to get those lines to be flat like that, even in dedicated, really well-designed, super well-designed rooms. It's really tough. It's really tough to get. So it's a relative thing. You do the best you can. Treating the room is the most powerful thing, in my opinion, for your playback, and you get used to it, dialing it in so you know what you got, and your familiarity with your room acoustics will carry you a long ways. So that's how Steve does it. That's why you can notice the consistency in his mixes. He had 3 different studios that had 3 really great sounding systems, but listen to those things. There's a really great consistency. Nicely done, Steve.
Well, thanks. I know what I want to hear. I just feel like now I'm more able to get to that without any guesswork. But yeah, I mix stuff kind of the same. I kind of like stuff not too wet. Well, it depends.
Mm-hmm.
I like to have some kick in my mix, and I like to have some bass. And but I believe I've made the mistake more than once of overemphasizing the bass, both in the kick drum and just the bass in general. So
Me too.
You don't want to do that stuff. Sorry,
We had a
family
question
members.
from Steve Wilkins, who said, interesting approaches. Frank Lyko's 30th Street studio seemed to rely on room sound, but was also huge. Is this design small space? And I think, Steve, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that was in a question about the tubes and such. The design, I think maybe what he may be asking is, are the tube diffusers something that you would use only in a small studio design, or is this something that can be
I think you could use them anywhere. And in the larger Oakland studio, I had roaming tube traps that I would surround the drums with. If I wanted a tighter drum sound, I could just put tube traps around it, and it would make a big difference. So modular tubes are a useful thing. I just think they work. They work.
Yeah.
They work anywhere. Really. In a really large space, I would think you would want more.
I have the highest ceilings I've had. I've got about 11.5-foot ceilings in here, and I'm definitely using. They hang higher, but definitely tubes down the middle and tubes right here made a huge difference. Pandemic is what caused that to happen, because many times when I'm building a studio, the second that you get it functioning, so you're happy that you can actually get a good mix on it, you go to work. And suddenly I had an opportunity that nobody was going to be here for a couple of months. So I realized, like on day 2, like what am I going to do? And I said, oh my goodness, I've got these tubes over in this corner here, and let me try and start experimenting with these things. So I started moving the tubes all over the place.
When you guys were done with this studio, I was kind of a nervous wreck, because I knew I had to put in a bunch of time mixing stuff. It was because it's always different. A different place is always different. I mean, that seems really obvious, but it's enough to make you second guess your work. So you need to put in some time, and then you need to take some time away from doing that to just relax and go, I think it's fine. I think it's fine. Maybe I should try something else and see if it's still fine. Anyway, after a couple of months, I started really gaining a lot of confidence about what I could hear in this place.
Fantastic. I think now it might be an appropriate time to do a slight change of focus. Well, big change of focus, and maybe we could talk a little bit more about the creative side of things. Steve, Kirk.
Sure.
There was a really good question from Joe Carter, asking, how is this game music composed and recorded? So, Steve, tell us a little bit more about the process of what it takes to do the work that you do.
Well, broadly speaking, it really depends on the budget. So if you're working, if you get you get if you get a job writing something for someone that's doing a mobile game that and they're maybe not able to pay you a lot of money, or they only want a few bits, then you're kind of in a position where you are not able to record live musicians or afford to bring them in. And then there are other situations where you're working for a client that wants so many revisions that it's simply not practical to hire live players, because then if you're asked to do it again, you have to hire them again to come back in and change like two notes. And so you have to have you develop over the years, you develop a little bit of savvy to try to detect what kind of clients you have. But I've been very lucky. The people I work for mostly give me a fair amount of autonomy and, just barely enough budget to hire live musicians, which I do whenever I can. So that being said, the process is a lot like I write the piece in MIDI and with some guitar or whatever. And then I have in mind what instruments I would like replaced. Usually brass instruments or stringed instruments, or if it is violin, trumpet, trombone, all of those. I know all of these people that are amazing that I'm just dying to hire for these projects. So whenever I can, I do. And what's required there at that point is to take the MIDI information and to export that as a MIDI file, and then or export it as a Sibelius file is what I did. Sibelius notation software, and clean it up and give them the parts and make sure that there aren't too many mistakes. And then they come in and replace the stuff, and then I mix it. Now I commit everything to audio. I don't ever run a MIDI track when I'm mixing, because there's too much latency, and you don't have enough control over the audio that way. I mean, you can use more plugins in EQ effectively when the MIDI part you have has been cleaned up as well as you can clean it up. You commit it to audio, then it becomes an audio track, and then I treat my Pro Tools session like a tape deck, a really versatile, useful tape deck. I only recently started using the playlist thing where you can have a bunch of versions of something. I tend to like to go for, was that a good take? Good. That's the take then. Let's move on to the next take and maybe do a safety. I do not like doing comps of, multiples of 10 like tracks, comped into one kind of thing. I don't know anyone that really does like doing that, but people do it. People think they need to do it, and I don't. But that being said, it is nice to have playlists where if someone does a great take and flubs a note, or one phrase isn't just speaking right, maybe three notes, you can almost always find it in another couple of takes. So it is good to have a few extra just in case. And when I'm doing guitar tracks, I do that too. But you can really go down a big rabbit hole when you do that. When you do when you have too many options, right? So I'm always kind of conscious about limiting the amount of options I need. I think it's good if you're a composer to just make the judgment call. Yes, that's a good take. That sounds great. I don't see any problem with that. Let's go to the next set.
So I have a question for you along that line.
Sure.
So it's nice to be able to be a good enough player to do what you're doing too. That's why a lot of people have comped their parts together, as they aren't actually very good. Not always true. But also, do you commit your sound at the moment, so you're not really doing a ton of processing to each of your guitar sounds, like with effects?
I mainly track with. I mean, guitars, anything goes, but but I will use a little limiting when people are tracking.
But I'm thinking like delays and reverbs.
Yeah, no, I don't do any of that. I don't print any of that stuff when I'm tracking.
Okay.
It's all post. Unless it's some bitchin' guitar sound with super cool echo thing on it, but I have more control over that, right? I can always do it later because I'm not leaving, you know.
So
But
the only thing that's locked in is your distortion sound, the way it's interacting with your
yeah,
play.
and that's really kind of the instrument anyway. It's the amp is part of the sound, and even if it's an amp model, you're still playing it like an amp. I mean, that's the whole point. So yeah, so I guess yes and no is the answer.
Okay.
But I tend to when I'm tracking other musicians, I just like to track them dry so that I can do multiple things with them. I mean, if someone already has reverb on them, then you can't take the reverb out for a certain section if you want something to just be dry and in your face. But if you record everything dry, then you can manipulate it more later. You have more flexibility.
Yeah, actually, I've gone to recording a guitar with directly into a DI box, coming out of it into the pedal board going into another DI, and that going out to the amp.
Yeah.
So if you want to completely re-affect the guitar, you've got this
Well,
absolute clean
I'm a
guitar.
simple man. I do not like running a lot of tracks on one instrument at a time. You know what I mean? I'm not one of those people that has much patience for that.
Well, I'm trying to capture live, so
Yeah. No, that's different.
yeah.
It is different.
Another question from Joe Carter. Joe was wanting to know a little bit more about your recording of session musicians. Steve asking, are the live musicians recorded in your studio, or is
Yes.
that room just for critical listening?
No, this studio, I would say I couldn't record a drummer in here, although maybe I could. People would sure hear it. I think drums would actually sound really great in here, don't you, Patrick? These tube traps do not make it a dead room. It's got a real good life to it.
It's balanced. It should be
Yeah.
balanced and not.
Yeah, it has a very pleasant resonance to it. So I would record a violinist. I would record a sax section or a woodwind section here, if I could, and I've always tried to do that. During COVID, though, I was pleased to discover that the saxophonist I hired, Jeff Koshua, had, in fact, he kind of prompted me to buy a universal audio interface because there were points during COVID where it was just more practical for him to do remote sessions, and he did. So I sent him stems and a part, and he was able to do the sessions, and I was able to even sit in while he was recording and go, yeah, that's what I want. Oh yeah, that's the wrong note. That's a score error. You need to change that to a B flat or whatever. So it was nice to be able to sit in while he was recording remotely, and then he put the stuff in Dropbox, and I dropped him into my session. It worked great. So I'll do it both ways. But it's nice to have people record in the place because it really sounds good. I had a cello player come in here a little while ago. Got a great sound. It was easy. There were no resonant lumps that I had to deal with in other places.
I track vocals in my control room all the time because I'm sitting right here. It's a great acoustic signature.
Cool. And on the creative side, without going too deep into this is obviously a very deep kind of question. Steve Wilkins had mentioned that he heard some of Frank Zappa's style in some of your orchestrations, Steve. Steve, I know because we're friends. We've talked about Zappa, and we both are big fans. Maybe Steve, you could talk a little bit about if there is a relationship there, and then in addition, who some of your other influences are briefly.
Well, the influence of Zappa is undeniable, and so I'm not going to deny it. I like to think that the stuff sounds like me at this point, but everyone's influenced by people, and he was pretty primary influence on me. And here's a guy that was very eclectic and was able to draw from any established style and make it his own personality. I like and so I feel like that was the methodology that I wanted to adopt, even if I didn't want to sound exactly like him. But I also, I also like classical music. I'm not sure I would call myself a classical aficionado, but my dad was a classical radio DJ, and he had all this stuff around the house. And so I got to listen to a lot of Bartok, a lot of Stravinsky, a lot of Debussy, uh, and that was a big influence. And jazz was a big influence. Another record my dad had at home was the Jerry Mulligan Quartet, which was Chet Baker and Jerry Mulligan, a bass player and a drummer, no chording instrument. I was really inspired by I'm really inspired by stuff like that. But I mean that's as far as I'll go
Yeah.
in terms of saying, like, of course everyone's got their influences. I like the way um I like the way his arrangements are can be very precise, and perhaps overly so. And I feel like that I wanted to try to take that and make it something that was organic for me.
And I have a question for you. I mean, for somebody that wants to create such precise arrangements, but that's also using this, like Zappa, using the studio as an instrument,
Hmm.
how do you approach um, composing in that way? Do you work with staff paper and draw out your ideas in that way, or are you kind of using the studio to develop your ideas as you go?
Yes, meaning I'll do all of that stuff.
Both.
Uh, I have staff paper, and I will write out notes uh, when I'm practicing my guitar. And if I come up with something good, I'll write something down. Uh, when I was working for Bartlow's Dread Machine, I was really trying to listen to a lot of King FM and get up on my classics, and listening to guys like Schubert and going, wow, that guy really loves modulating. I want to love modulating as much as him. I'm going to try to modulate 6 times in the next piece I write. That's what I'm going to do. I mean, things like, you just tell yourself what you give yourself something to chew on so that it gets you excited and ramped up, and then you do it. And I feel like that is kind of the thing that pulls you into your creative zone more than almost anything else. But I will work in my DAW just playing a 4-measure section until I go, well, that's something. I'm going to save that in my playlist, try to do it again better, and then I'll move on to my next section. That'll be my A section. The next section will be my B section. What I really like to do in my DAW when I'm composing is, once I have an idea, I take liberal use of memory locations, so that I can identify the form of the piece and also create the form of the piece. So if I have an A theme and a B theme, then I will frequently cut and paste the A theme after the B theme, and then modify it so that I have an A theme with variation. But I'm keeping track, right? And then, oh, do I need a C theme or what? I think I need a transition, a 2-measure transition into a C theme, and then I need to modulate. So, at that, if you keep putting in memory locations that say, oh, bring violin in here and stuff like that, you just should be liberal about it, because then you're looking at the form on your sidebar of memory locations, and you can jump back and forth and compare and stuff in it, and it does tend to feed into your creativity when you're doing it right.
Yeah.
And that's another way to compose. And another way to compose is to step input a melody and go, I'm going to step input a melody, and it's going to be 32 bars. And then I do that, and then I orchestrate it and change it if it sounds, crappy.
Yeah.
I try to
Because your music is very detailed, having those memory locations helps ground you and not get too lost in the weeds.
Yeah, and I run in that issue all the time, so it's nice to be keeping track of stuff. The last year has been a tough year, and I think that has been represented in my lack of ability to finish a big handful of pieces that ordinarily I would be done by now. I'm pretty good at finishing stuff. That was the other thing I was going to say is that most people that try to write music end up going, oh shit. They write a minute of music and they go, this really sucks. Then they throw it away. And I recommend that people do not do that. I recommend that people finish it, even no matter how shitty they think it is, because you think it's shitty because you really would rather be sipping on a cocktail, eating a bonbon, and not doing any work at all. And this is your brain telling you that you suck so you can get off the hook. So I feel like, finish stuff that you start is a really, really good idea to get better. Everything doesn't have to be great, but you can almost make anything good as long as you stick with it and develop it until it is something that you can be, relatively satisfied with. And I think people are too easy to give up, or too easy to come to the conclusion that what they've done is not worth pursuing. You never know. Your opinion tomorrow might be completely different about what you did yesterday.
Yeah. Well, I feel like those words of wisdom may be a wonderful place for us to conclude. I don't know that there've really been any additional questions. So at this point, I'd really like to thank once again Steve Kirk and Patrick Donicht for their presentation tonight. Thank you so much.
De nada.
My pleasure.
And so at this time, if people want to stick around, feel free to open up your cameras and we're going to invite you to introduce yourself. Steve Turnage, would you be willing to call on folks?
Sure.
Thank you.
I can do that. Got a little drama at the beginning, but we got in the groove and it's working well. So that's fantastic. Good job, guys. I've known Patrick since 1985. He helped to write my desktop mastering book, and he's been one of my highest honored humans on the planet for a long time, so I can reinforce his skill set. Okay, we know Steve and Patrick, and we know Greg. Is Gary Louis looks like he is in a session right now, so we want to ask him to say hi. So Mike, why don't we start with Mike Mateski?
Okay, I'm unmuted. Yeah, Mike Mateski. I'm a musician. I'm a cellist. In fact, we just got an invite today to play for another University of Washington graduation, our quartet. I own Opus 4 Studios. That's a studio that I designed, I engineer in, and I have a lot of empathy for what Steve and Patrick are talking about, particularly now. Costs are so much higher than when I built my studio. My studio is approximately 20 years old now. Now, as we all know, studios evolve. They're not, so yes, there's been evolution, but fundamentally though, boy, I'm glad I built mine when I did. And even at that point, it was honestly very expensive.
And Mike, what's the name of your studio?
Oh, Opus 4 Studios. For anybody who's interested, we have, I don't know, 1,500 videos on YouTube of various kinds, some of which are private, not private, but are restricted, some of which are public, and, depending upon application. And, but one thing you said, Steve, which I like, I don't think it's a good idea to throw out stuff, even if that day, you're not crazy about it.
Yeah.
That can happen. It can happen not only to a composer, it might even happen to a mix. And you might, sometimes we get fatigued, or we just get whatever our disposition is, it may not be the best. Rather than tossing it, might be a good idea to revisit later.
Cool. Well, Mike, let's carry on. So Rod Evans.
Oops. Okay, I'm unmuted.
Yes.
Rod Evenson. I'm in the Portland, Oregon area, living in the east end of Milwaukee, Oregon. I do location recording here in the area, and with a talk about noisy power, I'm largely using digital microphones because the locations have very bad power. So that's been one of my solutions to that issue. And then, of course, in terms of background noise, I mean, people will come into the shop just to listen to their stuff, and they'll have their little iPhone rolling around, and I hear it buzz, buzz, buzz in the loudspeaker. So that's
right.
That's my challenge sometimes. But I'm in the process of upgrading in that regard to go to AES EBU connectivity, or possibly Ravenna, which I use a lot of emerging technologies gear. But anyway.
Cool. Thanks, Rod. Charlie Post. Oh, sorry.
And the primary outlet, if you ever want to check up on my stuff, although they usually don't give me a byline, has been all classical, and I supply about half of what is aired in a program called Played in Oregon. So sweet. that should wrap me up here.
Very nice.
Thanks, Rod. Charlie Post.
Well, hello. First of all, thank you for opening this up to the general public. I'm in Chicago, actually, and the timing worked out sort of, except I was trying to put my kid to bed, so I was a few minutes late, but I caught most of it and really appreciate seeing all these details on this studio build. Anyway, I'm the recording engineer for the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, and I also do remote recording, so it was interesting to hear the challenges that you were just speaking about. I don't have many troubles with noise, but I am really curious about the digital microphones. I've seen Neumann and Sennheiser and Schoeps. It got into that game, I think, briefly. But anyway, so yeah, I don't know if I have anything else to say. I'm a musician, I play saxophone, and I still sometimes find time to play, not really. And I'm teaching myself electric bass with all my spare time. So nice.
We're very happy that you joined us.
Thank you.
But you mentioned the digital microphones. I hate to tell you, but they're now all vintage microphones. Neumann stopped making them last summer. So I put in a hurried order to get a few to fill out all my holes and or plugs in the wall, if you will. So
I saw that Neumann was discontinuing them.
Yeah,
I think Sennheiser is still doing it with their small.
Yeah, the MZD 8000, but then there's the issue of the control boxes, unless you've got a device, a recording device that takes the AES 42 in. So
Exactly. Yep. And I'm also a Paramix user, merging technology. I have a Happy and I have a Horus-based system downtown at work. So.
Greg, I just want to ask very quickly, Charlie, a question. Have you ever run across Kierkegaard and Associates? They redesigned the hall, Chicago Symphony, and Dana was one of the principals in the design of my studio.
Yeah, so Kierkegaard has split off into various factions,
right,
including Threshold Acoustics, and I'm friends with some of the acousticians over there. They regularly participate in our AES meetings, actually, so it's really nice to have them around. I've only been in Chicago for about 8 years. I'm originally from New York and lived in New York City for a long time. So I wasn't around for that renovation, but I've heard interesting things, both good and bad. You know, from a functionality standpoint, I won't say that the acoustic choices were bad.
Okie doke. Cool. Let's go. It's interesting. There's going to be fewer and fewer people as we get to the end here. That's something's working. Joe Carter.
Oh, hi there. Yeah, hey, thanks, by the way, for putting these on Zoom sessions. It's really great to not have to be in person there. I recently moved last fall, actually, from originally I was from Chicago, and then I spent the past 28 years or so out in Los Angeles. working for Disney and motion picture post-production, and past chairman of the AES LA section. And anyway, we moved out here now to Nashville, Tennessee area, to Spring Hill. And yes, people out here, because it's Music City, there's plenty who live life below 20 kilohertz also. So kind of trying to make a home out here, even though I miss LA and all the folks that I knew there. It's, you know, I'm kind of retired and just trying to get hooked up with the Nashville section now and continue to live life below 20K.
Nice. Okay. Stephen DeVore, are you available for camera and microphone?
Hi,
There
I'm
you
on
are.
the beach. I'm on the beach right now. Just thought I'd say hi from the beach. I'm kidding.
Sweet.
I've been doing audio for other people since I was a kid. I've got a degree, certificates, and so on. I just put some stuff in the chat if you want to take a look. And since 2014, I've been doing filmmaking and acting.
Outstanding. Thanks, man.
I need work, and I need work.
Good luck on that. Tom Stiles, if you're there.
I'm there. I'm clicking the buttons. Okay. So,
Congratulations. Good to see you, man.
yeah, you too. My name is Tom Stiles. I am now down in Northern California, but longtime resident of Seattle and still working in Seattle, doing recording work and teaching workshops through Jack Straw Cultural Center, and also doing some live sound work, and more and more over the last couple of years developing home-based projects and instruction and coaching. I don't have a home studio. I have per se. I'm trying to improve my mixing environment, but it's interesting to consider all the everything from Steve and Patrick's presentation tonight. It's really helpful. Thanks very much.
Sweet. David Shannon. Yay. Hi, David.
Is it working?
It
Okay.
is.
Yeah, I'm David Shannon, and I got into audio in the 70s via radio and did some video production as well, and came up to Seattle in 78. Ended up at the School of Music at University of Washington for a little while. That's where I met Gary Lewis. And I met Steve Turnage around that time too, only kind of in passing in the same social circles, and did sound for some bands. And now I'm trying to pull it all into virtual reality. So it's an interesting trip. And I attend a few AES meetings here as well as in my hometown of St. Louis.
Yeah, and David and I have been trying to get volumetric live streaming up off the ground, at least out from underground. And we have to talk sometimes. So I do believe that is everybody. So with that, if there's nothing else, Greg, we need to talk afterwards, of course. Does anyone have any final notes to play?
Why don't you introduce yourself?
Oh,
real quick.
Of course, no one knows me. I'm Steve Turnage, mastering engineer and circuit board designer. I do a lot of the Pictronics guitar pedals, and I wrote a couple of books on mastering for Hal Leonard. I just finished one of my philosophies is the universe makes the set list. And if you can listen well enough, you can go and do things that you wouldn't normally do. You do unusual things and unusual things happen. So I just got off of a couple of weeks of building 50 tube testers for Condor Electronics, which had like 70 parts, 70 different parts of 1 to 15 different parts of each of those. And it was like, it turned out to be much less than minimum wage, but now at least I could say that, you know, that's the way what I started out as was an electronics assembler. So I got to relive my childhood with my wife, who we're coming up on 42 years now. We met at AB Electronics doing assembly. And so that was sort of like a hard labor honeymoon. And so it was a pleasure to do. Now I did tens of thousands of solder joints. But what's great about that is afterwards, at like 10 in the morning on a Friday, and you're watching something on TV, you say, Julie, you know what we're not doing right now? And I've gotten tons of work come in over the last week since I've done it. So that filled up a lot of dead
Hey,
air.
Steve, we learn by doing. And sometimes what we learn is, I'm never going to do that again.
And we relearn. Yeah, exactly. And oh, the other thing that's sort of audio wise in my life is through this complicated game of getting a free Bang & Olufsen turntable for my next door neighbor that didn't work, but there was a couple of cartridges with it. I went through a long chain of getting an RX2 instead of Biogram RX, RX2 traded for one of the cartridges, because B&O cartridges are like unobtainium now. And it works so good. It's the best turntable I've ever heard, almost, except for the one I got from Patrick. And I've been able to make my 2000 record collection actually wake up again and live. And it's been just a joy. And there's this program, there's a series of programs called collectors.com, and it lets you put all of your records in this database by just you hit the barcode or the or the catalog number, and it pulls up everything, and it tells you what you got. All of here, there's well, that was something. There's, if you shake it, it gives you, oh, I hit the power, sorry. Stop it. If you shake it, it gives you a random record out of your record collection. So you can actually go and say, oh yeah, I didn't even know I had that. Because with records, especially with a lot of 12-inch 45s, you just get the side on. There's no title strips or anything, so you really can't look through it. And so it's been a pleasure to have superpowers. And that, in addition with Rune, that will let me look up anything. It's just like I've been doing hours and hours of listening to my new turntable, and it has such a low output that my amplifier, which is usually on 25-ish, has to go to 50. So the dynamic range is insane, and it sounds amazing. So I'm having a re-experiencing of my high school life that actually got me into music in the first place. And so that's resonating so hard. And I'm actually interested that it's Record Store Day on Saturday. I'm actually interested that I'll be able to go down and see, maybe look at some new vinyl. And it's been just fantastic. And it's very different than, the digital world that we've been in. I've been a mastering engineer for 25 years now. And for the first time, I'm sorry for taking over this, but for the first time, somebody that works with somebody I mastered 12 years ago got in touch with me and said, are you still mastering? Because I love all your work. And I said, yes. And he sought me out for actually my work. And his music is so good. I've been listening to it over and over and over again. So I've become a super fan of this guy that was brought in as a fan. And it's just sort of blowing me away. And I hope that happens more and more, because that's the equivalent of mailbox money, is when people are actually seeking you out because of what you've actually done, rather than you beating the turf for the business. So those are a couple of things.
My experience is that looking for work is never the way to find it.
The way to find it is listening for work. You don't look for work, you listen for work. See who needs what, and then that's how I got this assembly job, is that the tube testers, they were selling about 5 a month until Russia closed down and no tubes came out. And so now they're back ordered for tube testers for about 40 units, and they were doing them all in-house. And this guy put it on the local studios list of, does anyone know anyone that can assemble? And I said, that sounds like the universe making the set list to me. Showed up, and the only way you can get to know anybody is to work with them, especially busy people. The only way you can get to know busy people is to work with them. So I wanted to know these guys, and they fix electronics gear, and I've got electronics gear that I would like fixed at some point. It would be nice to be able to have a in route, and so that was a real cool beginning. see what you did, Greg? Just by asking me to introduce myself.
Well, it's great to catch up on what you've been up to, Steve. It's always fascinating to see the things that you're up to. So yeah, I think we're all happy to listen. And so at this point in time, I should probably conclude our little meeting. It sounds like Steve though wants to continue the conversation.
Which Steve?
You, Steve. Did you want to keep
well,
talking?
yeah. The one thing I want to continue is, Greg, if you would be so kind as to copy the text chat. So we have that, and I have done the recording, and when we're done here, I'll stop the recording and get that to you. And Charlie, visit us more often. It's a pleasure to have
the timing works out, I sure will. Thank you.
Esteemed humans, all of us that are here. I'm just really proud of what's happened over the last 20 or 30 years of our little section. With these people that we've extended our borders well, and now we have Ecuador, Patrick, and his unconventional but very, very empirically amazing work in the field. So, so good.
Been fun to be with you guys.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Fun to have been. Okay, so shall we call it then?
Yeah.
And so again, Greg, you and I should probably be the last ones in the room so we can do the sweeping up and stacking the chairs and making sure.
Yeah, and I also need to catch up with Steve. So we're not going to end the meeting, but if everybody could say goodbye, and I'll wrap things up with Steve. And
you guys can eat the rest of the virtual cookies also.
Yeah. Well, we'll take them home. The water and cookies, definitely. For next time.
All right, thanks everybody.
Way, please.
Good night, all.
Nice meeting you all. Have a good day.
Buenas noches.
Yes.